Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay. Never comes again, another day like yesterday. Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.
Good morning, everybody. This one will be filed under things that your therapist wants to tell you or maybe could tell you and often is not appropriate for the moment, or when people are really struggling or suffering. Sometimes it's not appropriate to say the simple truth because the simple truth is often painful. And there's a simple truth about couples. I've talked about this as a one-off or sort of in passing in many conversations about couples work. It all sort of started with the idea of a trauma bond, which I'll go ahead and describe to you what a real trauma bond is. Not, people think a trauma bond is just, it's two people who both had difficult childhoods and they bond over the fact that it was painful. That's not really what a trauma bond is. So I'll review that and then I'll go on and talk about the ways in which we choose partners that are incredibly consistent. So let's start with a trauma bond. A trauma bond is, right, this person here, my right-hand person, had a difficult childhood or had a style of childhood in which the way their parent was neglectful or abusive resulted in a certain fight or flight coping mechanism, right? And so when their fight or flight coping mechanism is activated, it's this unconscious activation, the way they appear is exactly what is needed for person left hand for them to look like what their parents did when their parents were neglectful and or abusive, right? So this person's fight or flight coping mechanism in response to their own childhood trauma looks exactly like the behavior that activates this person's unconscious response to their neglectful or abusive parent. And that activates their fight or flight response. And their fight or flight unconscious coping mechanism looks exactly like this first person's negligent or abusive parent. So it's this incredibly elegant system. Now, this might sound really weird. People's understanding of psychology is as simple as, if you had a parent who hit, you choose a partner who's physically violent. Okay, that tends to be true, but it's actually not so much about physical choices or external choices, although that tends to always be there. It is about an unconscious emotional psychological signature or dynamic or way of being. And we choose someone who has an unconscious way of being that is the same as our negligent or abusive parents' unconscious way of being, so that it activates our unconscious fight or flight coping mechanism. And that activates, and once that activates, it looks like our partner's abusive or negligent parent, which unconsciously activates their unconscious coping mechanism. Now both partners are unconsciously activated into their childhood coping mechanisms, and they begin to look like that. That's what they are. That's all they are. So let's use a simple model. Let's say this is the one who had really negligent, cold, cut-off parents, and their coping mechanism was to chase and to chase and to chase and to chase, to the point that they become intrusive and oppressive and controlling. They chase. They will choose someone who had overwhelming intrusive parents, so that in order to protect themselves, they had to cope by withdrawing and cutting off. So this person in their unconscious coping mechanism chases and is intrusive and controlling, and that activates this person's cutoff and ability to withdraw. And this person's cutoff and ability to withdraw activates this person's chase and intrusiveness and controlling. Okay, so now all they're doing is unconsciously playing out their trauma coping mechanisms with one another, and it just cycles and cycles and cycles and cycles and cycles, and all they do is blame the other person. They may develop enough self-awareness to go, oh, this person's just like my parent. It's the same experience I've been having my entire life. It was my whole childhood and blah, 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 and they're angry at that other person, and vice versa. The other person's like, it's not me, like you're incredibly intrusive and controlling and you don't pay attention to that, and I have to withdraw. And it's like, well, you make me be intrusive because you're so withdrawn and blah, blah, blah. They're both right. They're both right. What they both fail to see is that they both chose someone who would play out their trauma trigger, who would hand them their trauma trigger. And you can spend decades sitting there. You can break up, which doesn't make any difference because people just go on and choose someone else who does the same thing, maybe with a little bit of a different style. Or people will stay together for decades going, it's this person, they do this, they do this, they did. If they didn't do this, I wouldn't be like this. It's like, no. You were like that before you came in, and you chose someone because you're like that, because that person justifies you being in a trauma state, an unconscious trauma coping mechanism. It justifies it for you. Now you have a justified reason to keep replaying this trauma mechanism. And you have an excuse to remain unconscious of your own emotional dynamic. Right? If you didn't have this person, you still walk around with this unconscious emotional dynamic. It is a fundamental unconscious emotional posture for you, and the same thing for the other person. Right? A trauma bond just means I'm a person who walks around with an unconscious emotional dynamic that's always there, always ready to be activated, and I simply choose someone who gives me an excuse to activate it. Okay, let me say that again. Trauma bonds result because I have an unconscious emotional reality that I'm generating 24 hours a day. It may not be activated all the time, right? A violent person, a person with an unconscious violent emotional state doesn't walk around punching every person that they see, but they walk around in that state waiting for an excuse to express it. And they will choose a partner who regularly allows them to lie to themselves that my partner made me do it. That's what a trauma bond is. Both parties come into the relationship with an unconscious emotional reality and truth and illusion that they generate based on their childhood trauma and suffering and neglect. And they walk around with that as their emotional reality. And both partners choose a person who gives them the right to activate it regularly and to go, it's not my fault, it's because this other person. Okay? That's what a trauma bond is. That's what a trauma bond is. A trauma bond isn't just, oh, we related to one another and we're able to understand each other because we both had difficult childhoods. A trauma bond is I have an unconscious emotional truth or illusion that I generate all the time that makes me a victim, makes me an automatic victim, and I choose someone who their unconscious trauma content spurs them to behave in a way that gives me a right to activate mine, and mine being activated gives them a right to activate theirs. and we position our partner as our abusive or negligent parents, and we sit there and we spend decades doing this. Right? Going to therapy. What is it about this person? Why can't I talk to them? Working on communication. Blah, 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 blah. Communication's important. It can really help. Lots of things can really help. But if you refuse to see that you, before you met that person, you had an unconscious, emotional delusion that placed you as a victim, as a wounded party in relationship to reality in the world. If you don't see that, working on communication, working on intimacy, working on honesty, working on all of these other things is polishing the brass on the Titanic. It's polishing the brass on the Titanic. If you can't own that you chose that person for a reason because they justify your unconscious emotional posture in the world, and they give you the right to activate it and re-experience it, and they give you the right to have your trauma coping mechanism come up and to engage it and go, well, it's not my fault, right? If you don't know that, working on these other components is just polishing the brass on the Titanic. Okay? That's what a trauma bond is. A trauma bond is not that we both suffered and so we understand each other and we bonded over the fact that we both had difficulty. That's not a trauma bond. That's just sympathizing, which, okay, that's okay. A trauma bond is I choose someone who behaves in a way that gives me the right to activate what was already my own unconscious emotional content before I ever met that person. It is how I walk around in the world. It's an energy that I unconsciously generate 24 hours a day, and I don't take responsibility for the fact that I generate that. And then I choose someone who gives me a right to generate it and activate it while pretending that it's not my fault. That's what a trauma bond is. It's incredibly elegant. It's incredibly specific. A person chooses someone incredibly, perfectly calibrated to the specific colorations and the specific context of your trauma and your trauma coping mechanism. Maybe I'll do a longer podcast episode at some point about what that is. Like how elegant, specific, and exacting that model is. And what the spiritual implications are for the fact that that happens. That it's not random. It's not random, man. Okay, but that wasn't the point. I wanted to review that because a simpler point that I'm going to make today is sort of in the same field, in the same information of the ways in which the things about ourselves that we don't want to acknowledge in our romantic relationships. Okay? So I'm here to sort of pop and deflate a belief, a victim belief that society perpetuates through media, through TV, through movies, through poetry, through conversation, through belief, that is bullshit. Okay, so take the trauma bond, set that to the side. That's its own thing. I've talked about that before. Maybe I should do one whole episode on that at some point. This one is people who are shocked and hurt when, let's say they've been married for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, or they're in a long-term relationship. And one day their spouse shows up and has a very direct conversation and is like, I'm leaving. I'm packing. This is how this is going to happen. I'm out. I'm done. And this person will be like, well, wait, what happened? Like, we're not going to talk about what happened? Like, we were so happy. we have kids and we're doing this and we're doing that, and it seems like we have sex regular. How did this happen? And the story that person will tell is everything was fine. They never said anything to me. And, all of a sudden one day they just showed up and, I could tell maybe things were a little off, but I had no idea. And they just walked out. And they'll tell this story as if they're a victim. Now, here's where I want to deflate and lampoon this social belief. And this, again, is stuff where, as a therapist, you watch this stuff. You see it in yourself. You see it in other people. Again, I'm not judging you. Like, I see it in me. I see it in people around. I see it in friendships. It's like I'm part of the same thing. It's not like because I see this that I'm not also blind, right? That person may spend years telling the story as if they're shocked and hurt and they're the victim. But here's what I can tell you as a couples therapist. How in the fuck is someone so profoundly unhappy and unfulfilled in a marriage for years and you didn't know? Even if they weren't coming, and I promise you they were. I promise you they were. They were telling you. They were telling you. They were telling you. They were trying to tell you through behavior and through word, and you normalized it all. You just sat there and acted like, oh, this, people fight sometimes, and you didn't listen. You normalized it. They were telling you, and you didn't listen. There's no such thing. There's no such thing, guys. There's no such thing. If you were shocked and surprised, you were not paying attention, and you not paying attention is the primary problem. And then we want to go, oh my God, with this and that, and why didn't they tell? They did. They did tell you. You didn't listen. You kept normalizing and normalizing and normalizing, right? It's the same thing. And I'm not saying the other person is off the hook or that they don't know how to communicate, or maybe they didn't communicate directly, or blah, blah, blah. But the truth is the primary experience that you have in your significant romantic relationships, or any significant romantic relationship, the primary experience you have is one of connection or one of disconnection. How the fuck do you not know it's profoundly disconnected? How do you not know that? There's no such thing as someone just shocked you. That doesn't exist. That's not a thing. If you were shocked, that means you were the one who's disconnected and not paying attention and normalizing when that person tried to communicate to you that they were not happy, or they needed a change or something, right? There's no such thing. The person who's like, oh my God, I was so shocked. I never saw, this is so unfair. I never saw this coming. Everything seemed fine. It was fine for you, and you were not paying attention, and you were not listening when other things were being communicated. Okay, let's make it a little bit more confusing, and let's come closer to maybe someone really is a victim, right? I'm not saying you're not a victim. I'm saying you chose someone who's like a certain thing and sat there and pretended that they're not like that, and then got shocked that they were like that, right? So let's give you another... let's say you're a very dedicated and loyal man, and you find the woman who's the right woman for you, and you have kids, and right, you've been married for 15 years, and then as a shock, through word of mouth and through a friend finally telling you, you find out that your wife has been having affairs and cheating on you for 6-7 years out of a 15-year marriage. Half of the marriage, she's been stepping out and seeing other people. And you're shocked. You're shocked. she was that person when you married her. She didn't suddenly change. There's no such thing as people suddenly changing, right? Okay, you're a victim. You don't deserve that. Nobody deserves to have their romantic, I'm not blaming you. Nobody deserves to have their relationship fall apart in front of them where they feel shocked and it's like they're so confused and they don't understand what happened. Nobody deserves that suffering. Nobody deserves that pain. But the suffering, the shock, is because you were pretending something in your head. You built some reality in your head that made you feel safe, and you were relating to that reality in your head. You were not relating to the real person because that real person was a fucking cheater like from the beginning. They were always that person. How did you not know? Right? So we have all of these victim narratives. And we love these gotcha moments, or we love these things of like, oh, you found out they're such a piece of shit, and oh my God, and it can happen to anybody, and blah, blah, blah. And all it is us telling ourselves giving ourselves a victim story. Because if you're paying attention, if you are emotionally present to the people you're around, if you pay attention to what their history is and what their childhood is and how they related to their parents and how they relate to you and what it feels like, are they present? Are they paying attention? Are you paying attention to them? Do you have a reasonable facsimile of an idea of when they're going through a hard time at work and what that's like and whether their own trauma is part of what they're experiencing? It's like, if you don't know that, you're just relating to some shit in your head. You don't know that person. If you don't know that, you don't know that person. You want to hear something really weird? You know what therapists do? What intake is and history taking and blah, blah, blah. It's basically being a human being and fucking paying attention and listening to what people say without judging it so that you can actually get to know who they are at a somewhat subtle level. And to understand what their relationship was with their parents and what they experienced and what sort of like unconscious coping mechanisms developed out of that. And then paying attention to them over a period of time so that you see subtle patterns show up. But the thing is we act like that's what a therapist does because they're some specially trained human. No, that's just what it is to know what another fucking human being is. We shouldn't be paying therapists to do that. That's what it is to have a relationship with somebody else. If you don't have any fucking idea, if you're not capable of holding a conversation with your friends or the people that you're around and having some idea of what they grew up in and how that impacted them and how they may have unconscious patterns and you know how things feel for them that's specific to them and not somebody else. If you don't know that, you don't know shit about that person. You don't know them. You just know that you have fun with them and talk some shit and have some beers. Okay, that's fine. I have buddies. But don't be surprised. Right? We have this whole narrative in our culture where we act like we're victims of the fact that we don't know shit about other people. And we view it as some weird woo-woo thing that a therapist will sit there and also therapists can be full of shit like, oh, yeah, right, and do all, shut up. Like just sit there and listen to that person and it's blindingly obvious that what they experience and what comes up for them and what patterns are going to come up for them. If you don't do that with your friends, you don't know shit. You just built something in your head that you're relating to that makes you feel safe or makes you feel excited or makes you feel like you like the person. But what you like is what you built in your head. You don't know that person. Right? So the things that therapists know, or they should know, or couples therapists know, is the person who's shocked when things go sideways in their marriage is the person who's emotionally, psychologically disconnected from other people and disconnected from self. Because that person did get messages. There are behaviors, there are super obvious patterns. And again, we act like that this is some specialized, amazing skill that therapists have. This is the primary skill of being a human being that we should be teaching children from zero. It should be a major part of what it is to be in school, in all of our experiences and all of our social experiences, should be modeling and interacting in learning other people's unconscious behaviors and conscious behaviors and patterns that derive out of all the experiences they've ever had. And if you're not interested in what other people live through, you're full of shit. You don't know. All you do is construct something in your head that you relate to that makes you feel good. You don't know. You don't know that other person. This realization partially came, out of us experiencing the loss of our home in the Palisades wildfires, right? And so you have a lot of people trying to, or wanting to empathize, kind people with good intentions. So for each individual, it's a specific thing. For someone who had, enough wealth to own like a $5 million home in the Palisades, and they have to have, fire insurance and blah, 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 they had an incredibly stressful process of like, let's say their home didn't burn, but smoke damage. It's like, what do you keep? What out of these things that you love and that were part of your life do you keep? Is it safe to just wash the clothes and put your kids back in those clothing? Can you keep the photographs? So you have to throw them out. There's this incredibly difficult emotional experience. And then all the while you're battling back and forth with an insurance company that's going to do everything they can to not actually pay you what the value of the thing is. Are you going to tear it down? Are you going to rebuild? Like, there's years of stress and stressful situations that come out of that. If you don't know what and who, and then that person has their childhood. Maybe this is a person who had a parent who's administratively intrusive and controlling and stressful and super anxious. So when they engage this kind of process, it's incredibly stressful for them. And they have tons of childhood stuff coming up, and it's very, very difficult. And they need lots of support. Like, if you don't know that about your friend or whomever, you don't know shit. You don't know what they're going through, right? And so we were a different case. We were leasing. We didn't have any insurance, nothing. And we left, and I was wearing an outfit, and my kids were wearing their outfits at school, and my wife was wearing an outfit, and that was it. Everything was gone. But if you also don't know that I had never succeeded prior to then. This was the first decade in my life I had succeeded. I had a career. I had enough money for us to live in a nice community. We had spent 10 years accruing things that were important to us. When, people are like, oh, stuff doesn't matter. But yeah, it fucking matters. We spent 10 years building out tools that we used to build projects with our kids. And we had all of their pictures and, blah, blah, blah. And financially, it wiped us out because we were not those people. So we had a different experience, right? So people would try to come and empathize and try to say kind things like, you know what, you guys were safe, thank God. And, stuff is just stuff. You can replace it. It's like, yeah, not us. We don't have that kind of money. We lost everything we had. And we had spent, that was the first time in my life I had been successful, blah, 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 right? So it's a different experience than that person who's going to go through 3 to 5 years of stress and overwhelm and struggle to keep what they had because they had earned or inherited. Like, I don't give a shit. I'm not here to say somebody deserves empathy and somebody doesn't. What I'm saying is each individual person has their own experience, their own story. And if you don't know what they lived up until that point, you have no fucking idea, right? In my case, I had never succeeded at anything. That was the first time I'd ever succeeded at anything in my entire life. And it all went up in smoke. And I'm back at zero right? I have my practice. Well, right? That's a very, very different experience than someone who built 2 successful businesses and has their retirement locked in. And okay, I'm not saying my struggle is harder than theirs. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is if you don't know what their struggle is, you don't understand who they are and what they're going through. You can't just say, oh, that's really hard. Yeah, I'm so sorry you went through that. Okay, I'm not asking, right? I'm not giving you my story because I need your empathy. I have a community and I have close friends, right, who know me, et cetera, et cetera. What I'm saying is, in your relationship, it's shocking how many people have no fucking idea who the person is that they married. As long as they're having sex and the person shows up and they have a few dinners together and they're taking care of the kids, they're like, oh, everything's great. Is it? Do you know your partner's long-term patterns and unconscious behaviors? Right? I'll give you a for example. I know my wife's childhood and I know her relationship to her father and I know, blah, blah, blah. And her father could be very loving, but he was also very narcissistic and very self-interested. And real estate has not an insignificant number of narcissists in it. They're good. They do a good job. Like it's a good place for them. It's an adaptive, right? And there were cases where she signed on with people who played to her ego and invited her to play to their ego. And it's like, I know where this is going. I know. I can't go and say, hey, don't do this because blah, blah, blah. She had her learning process, but I understand what it is. And if she comes home having a little bit of a trauma reaction to some interactions with someone, I'm not shocked. Like I know what's happening. I see this, right? I know where this is going. I know who this person is she's working with, and I know what kind of responses she's going to have. And I know that things can go sideways that are not just about like, oh, that deal didn't work, but that it's going to bring up childhood trauma and abandonment feelings, right? If you don't know, like, you're not supposed to leave that for your therapist. That's not something that just the therapist does. Therapy is literally an industry that has grown up in the total failure of human beings to pay fucking attention to one another and to learn enough about one another that the people who should understand you understand you. Okay, there's other stuff, right? So when things go significantly sideways and there's serious childhood trauma, I specialize in that. And there are techniques and there's a lot of knowledge or scientific knowledge about what the nervous system does. I'm not saying everybody's supposed to know that. Okay, I have an expertise. There are lots of people who have expertise. So let me back out halfway, right? Therapy isn't just a failure of society. There's an expertise and there's knowledge, right? But what I'm saying is when things are relational and it's about attachment, we have this expectation that therapists are supposed to be so profoundly, like unusually empathetic and understanding. It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? That's supposed to be your friends. That's supposed to be your romantic partner. That's supposed to be your parents. And then we tell ourselves this narrative in society that we're a victim, like we're completely detached. We have no idea that that's our responsibility, that we should be exploring those realities with the people with whom we're involved. We should know those realities. We should be sharing. And I don't mean trauma dumping all the time. I mean just as you have conversations, what the fuck are you talking about? Right? If my wife has an interaction in her work and it sort of kicks up a little trauma and she comes home to talk about those interactions, what the fuck are you talking about? If you're not talking about like, yeah, this has got to bring up some pain around your dad. Like there's a little bit of coloration there. That's not the domain of therapists, even though we get paid to do that. That's what we're all supposed to be doing. And it's not some huge, like it's not rocket science. It's literally nothing more than just paying fucking attention and understanding that you don't know someone if you've not spent hours and hours and hours and hours over years slowly deepening your understanding. You can't just go, yeah, they were an athlete when they grew up, so they interact with a lot of sports, and so I'm pretty sure, I know my wife likes to stay healthy and athletic, and she's got to put, there are people who it's like there are stunningly obvious emotional realities in their environment with their in-laws or whatever, and it's clear that that person has no fucking clue. All they know is like, oh yeah, he likes that TV show. He like, yeah, no. The guy watches sports. He's just a regular guy. What the fuck are you talking about? There's no such thing as just a regular guy. Your father-in-law is not just, there is no regular, your father-in-law is not just a regular guy. And the fact that you can talk about the Lakers with this person and sit and watch a game doesn't mean shit. You don't know anything about that person. You have no idea. You have no idea whether that dude is going to randomly at the age of 68 pop off and shoot himself in the mouth. You don't fucking know. You don't know anything. We have to get over this idea that just because you know whether someone's interested in sports or what kind of beer they like, that you know shit about them. If you have not explored their emotional, psychological reality and tracked it and have some idea of what they grew up in, you don't know shit about that person. You see this a lot in marriages. It's like, oh, we need to work on more intimacy and blah, blah, blah. And like, I'll talk to, and by the way, people lay this off on men. They'll be like husbands. It's like, shut the fuck up, man. There is no gender on this motherfucker. There are women who are so narcissistically obsessed with their own emotional experience, they wouldn't know what their husband is experiencing if you slap them in the face with it. They would have no idea. There is a gender tendency for when men are detached to be withdrawn and quiet and detached. And when women are detached, there's a tendency for them to do it by projecting their dramatic emotions into everything. And this is not a rule, right? This is just, it might be the way we're socialized. It might be biological. I don't fucking know. I don't care. But there is a tendency there. But it's detachment, the same. It's detachment, the same, right? And so you get these spouses. It's like, well, who is this person? What are they like? Well, they're really nice. Well, yeah, they're really believe me, like super nice, really sweet. And, he's good father, hugs the kids, and, he's an accountant. So he spends a lot of time, things get really busy around March or April. And oh, really? Like, that's what the fuck you know about this person who you smush intimate sexual organs together and breathe the same air? Like, that's what the fuck you know? You don't know shit. You don't know anything. But guess what, guys? That's the norm. That's the norm. That's the norm. I remember when I was a more neurotic therapist, and I viewed and believed that my ability to go deep and to immerse myself in someone else's experience was this exceptional thing that made me a therapist. And every once in a while I would come across someone with real emotional intelligence, just, right? They're not a therapist, they're not involved, whatever. And I would hear them talk about their kids or whatever. And I would start to feel threatened and scared, because it's like they would have a real profound immersion and an understanding of what their kids experience and their emotional experiences, psychological experiences across time, and why their kids do certain things and what they needed to work with to help mitigate damage or to augment their kids' strengths. And they knew who their partner was, and blah, blah, blah. And I would feel threatened because I bought the bullshit that somehow this is some specialized skill that therapists are supposed to have, and that's why we get paid. And how come this random person who, is a computer scientist has this skill? Well, no, it's the opposite, man. We're all supposed to. That's normal. Like, what are we doing? If you don't know that, what are we doing? If you don't know that, if you are not having that experience of yourself and other people, if you're not having that experience of the most important people in your life, if you have no fucking clue how your child feels, or can see them having an emotional experience across time that changes and evolves with their age and with the friends they have and with what happened in sports and with the fact that you were tired and grouchy, like, if you have a really hard 6 months at work and you're kind of tired and grouchy for 6 months, if you don't know that your children are having an experience because of if you don't know that, if you're just like, well, I don't know, it should be fine. They have school and they're going to see their friends. If you don't fucking know that they're also having an experience because you're having an experience, you don't know shit. You don't know. You're not paying attention. You don't know what's going on. And then we send our kids to therapy and pay someone to actually listen and to track. And again, like, I feel guilty because I'm like, this is my business. I have a successful, thriving practice based on the fact that, sometimes parents are like, hey, like, what's going on? And I'm sort of explaining some subtleties and some longer term patterns. And it's like, a therapist is not a special kind of person. You can notice patterns if you just fucking pay attention and listen. Just listen to what they're saying and start noticing across time, right? Okay, so I went far afield, but let's bring it back to the original point. Society has perpetuated this belief that there's such a thing as someone being shocked, caught off guard, like they can't believe it. I had no idea that she was so unhappy. I had no idea he was so unhappy, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, man, all you're indicating is how emotionally disconnected you are from yourself and from other people, because that person was unhappy for a long, long time. Unless you chose some psychopath, which is even more of a significant statement. Right? I think about this interaction from Tom Leykis, who could be cruel to women sometimes, but was not wrong about a lot of things that he pointed out. Is some woman called up and was, talking about, like, sometimes men are complete assholes and how abusive her ex was and blah, blah, blah. And was being the victim of the situation. And you look at that and you're like, hey, man, an abusive man who's physically abusive and this woman, and she has a child, and how difficult it was for her to get away, and she had to go to a shelter to get away from this guy and blah, blah, blah. And Tom Leykis starts talking it through, and he's like, what are you talking about? He's like, okay, so how long were you married? It was only like 3 or 4 years, and they had known each other a couple years before that. And he was like, he was that person before you got married. Like, what are you talking about? And then he slowly works through the story. Of course, she's offended and she's a victim in the situation. And then it comes out that the guy had been violent with her before she ever had a kid. So he had been violent with her. She then had a child with him. He continued to be violent. And then she had a second child with him. Okay, I'm a trauma therapist. I understand why people compulsively, repetitively do things that are unhealthy for them. But the thing is like, that's what I'm talking about. It's like, how are you a victim of a situation that you knew what it was? Not only that, you put 2 kids in it. You put 2 kids in it. And now you're still coming back and going, oh, it was so hard, and like you're a victim of the situation. You willfully chose someone who was violent with you before you got married and before you had kids. And then you had 1 kid. Okay, so you wake up and go, oh, I can't do this to my kid, and you have to escape, and it's very difficult. We all are going to empathize and try to protect you. And then you have another kid, and you're still acting like you're a victim. so often we choose to be victims, right? So what I'm saying is, right, this is a milder version of that. That we choose someone who gives us a right to be traumatized and victimized. And then we spend years in it using it as an excuse to feel the way we already felt before we chose them. Because the only reason we chose them is because we already unconsciously felt that way, right? And society keeps telling us this story that you can be shocked or surprised. But the only way you could be shocked or surprised if you've been in a relationship with someone for 7 years or 15 years or 20 years, if they say commit suicide, or if they have a midlife crisis and you find out that they've been banging their secretary, or they become rageful and they're just constantly in a rage and they become verbally abusive, blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying you're responsible for how that person acts, and I'm saying you are not paying attention because that person was unhappy a long time before that, and how the fuck do you not know? If you didn't develop open, honest communication, and if you're not paying attention, and if you're not paying attention to what that person grew up in, and what kind of patterns that sets them up for, and what kind of unconscious responses that sets them up to have, and if you don't see that you're sticking your finger in that unconscious response over and over and over, and they may not know how to frame it, but they come and say, don't do that, or you make me mad when you do that, and you're like, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? What? Well, okay, fine, okay, fine, I won't, blah, blah. Well, you don't get it. You're not getting what they're telling you. Even if you back off on the behavior, what they needed was for you to know them. To know them. And if you don't know them, then you're just relating to something in your head. And then the actual person 15 years later leaves and you're like, what the fuck happened? Well, what the fuck happened is you had a relationship to some bullshit in your head that kept you feeling safe and like, oh, everything's fine, and you just got to go on autopilot. And pretty soon, the real person who kept trying to send you messages, I don't like this, I don't like this, I don't like this, left. And you're left, go ahead, keep relating to the bullshit that was in your head. I think that's the message for today. Things that your therapist knows and may not say because it may not be appropriate or may be too painful in the moment are that if you were in a long-term relationship with a friend or a romantic relationship, and you're suddenly shocked and surprised that they were cheating, or suddenly their behavior drastically changed and you have no idea why, or they just up and leave you, your shock is a sign of your disconnection, that you've never actually explored their experience or been aware of their experience, of you or anything else. Because when you're aware of people's experience and you tune into it, they feel connected and they feel safe and they feel excited to be alive and they enjoy it. And it's fun and it grows and it breathes. If that's not happening, and this is not to make you the only one responsible, both parties are responsible for that disconnection. Sometimes the other party is responsible for the fact that they put up with it and kept pretending that things were fine. But disconnection is disconnection. Both parties are responsible when it's disconnected. I'm sorry if you experienced that. It's hard, it's painful. I've been shocked and by things I shouldn't be shocked by. I'm full of shit. I have blind spots. I'm not judging you. What I'm saying is we have to change the standard and we have to change the way we relate to this. We have to stop pretending that there's some magical, mysterious rocket science insight that's going on with therapists. All that happens is we sit and listen to people without judging them, and we listen and we listen and we listen. And we listen to them make sense of things, and we ask them, what happened then? Well, what was that like? Well, how many times did your mom do that? Well, that must have been difficult. What sense did you make of it? What was it like for you? What sense did you make of it? This isn't some magical therapist question. You should be asking that question. Right? You should be asking that of your loved ones and your close relationships, not sending them out to therapy so that the therapist can ask them. We need to stop being shocked. Our shock, it only is an indicator of how disconnected we are from our own experience and other people's experiences. As I gave you that example of us losing our home, our leased home in the wildfire versus people with, say, a $7 million home losing it. They're going through a specific type of trauma and struggle that wears on them and hurts them, and it's frightening and it's struggle, and there's depression and feelings of helplessness and like they're struggling in a certain way that relates to them specifically. And what happened to us was a surgical strike in which the first time I had significantly succeeded in my life and had built a life, it was all immediately gone. That's just a different kind of suffering. That's all. If you want to empathize with me, you need to understand the history and how that works. If you want to empathize with them, you have to understand the history and how that works. You're not responsible for knowing this about everybody, but you should know this kind of shit about specific people that you're close to, friends and family members. And if you're not bothering, don't pretend that you're close to anybody, because all you're doing is relating to some shit in your head that you built that makes you feel comfortable. You're setting that person up to be something that you built in your head. And if you do that, people are going to leave. I love you guys. Talk to you next time.
Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.